Real people, real confessions, the stories you weren't supposed to hear. Welcome to Beyond Reddit Stories. They say weddings are supposed to be the happiest day of your life. For me, it became the exact moment I realized I didn't really know the man I was about to marry. There I was standing at the altar, heart pounding under layers of lace and satin, surrounded by friends, family, flowers, and fairy lights. Everything looked perfect. It was perfect, until it wasn't. My fiancé stood across from me, eyes misty, holding my trembling hands. The officiant asked him to say his vows. He looked straight into my eyes, took a shaky breath, and said, "I, Nathan, take you, Emily, to be my lawfully wedded wife." Emily? Not my name. Not even close. He called me by her name. In front of everyone I loved. In front of God. In front of the future we were supposed to have. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from confusion. It was the kind that's laced with shame, with realization, with unraveling. I stood there frozen, like my soul had been sucker punched. I wanted to believe I misheard him. I wanted to believe maybe I was just overwhelmed, dizzy from adrenaline or the heat or the emotion of it all. But the look in his eyes said everything. He knew what he said. He didn't try to correct it. He just stood there still holding my hands like maybe if he didn't move, time would freeze and undo it. But time doesn't work like that. Especially not when you've just shattered someone's trust in front of 200 people and a camera crew. In that moment, I had a choice. Smile through it and pretend nothing happened, marry the man who accidentally said the wrong name. Or walk away. Ruin the picture-perfect day everyone had spent months planning. Break my mother's heart. Embarrass him. Embarrass myself. Face the whispers, the headlines, the "can you believe what she did?" You probably already know what I chose, but you don't know why. You don't know how many red flags I ignored, how many excuses I made, how many nights I lied awake wondering why something in me just didn't feel right. This is not just a story about a man saying the wrong name. It's a story about how sometimes the wrong name is the final straw in a web of lies we've woven around ourselves, just to avoid the truth we already know. Let me take you back to where it all started. To the moment I felt I fell in love with Nathan, and the moment I started losing pieces of myself trying to be someone else's replacement. Before all of this, I was just me, a regular woman, nothing special, nothing dramatic. I worked as a graphic designer at a mid-sized marketing firm downtown. I had a small apartment with terrible water pressure and a cat named Crumble who hated everyone except me. I spent most of my weekends thrifting, binge-watching true crime shows, and sharing way too much with my group chat of college friends. I wasn't looking for love. Not really. I had just gotten out of something messy. A 2-year situationship that left me doubting whether I was lovable or just convenient. You know the type, the guy who wasn't ready for commitment but was always ready to text at 2 a.m. when he was lonely. So when I met Nathan, he felt like everything that guy wasn't. He was decisive, confident. He looked me in the eye and asked real questions. He planned actual dates. He remembered my coffee order. He called when he said he would. He even asked to meet my mom after just a few weeks, which, at the time, I thought was sweet. Now I realize it was fast, too fast. But at the time, God, it felt like relief. Like someone had finally chosen me, loudly. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party, one of those crowded rooftop things where the music is too loud and the drinks are too weak. He was standing by the railing, looking out over the city, sipping something brown and expensive. I joked that he looked like a villain in a rom-com. He laughed. We clicked. He asked for my number. 3 weeks later, we were inseparable. He told me early on about his ex, Emily. Not in too much detail, just that she'd broken his heart and left him at his lowest. It felt honest, raw. I admired the vulnerability. But then I noticed something. He talked about her like she was the one that got away. At first, I chalked it up to old wounds. I told myself, everyone has a past. I even felt flattered, like maybe I was helping him heal. He was attentive, romantic. He made me playlists, cooked me dinner, left post-it notes on my mirror that said things like, "You're everything." And slowly, I began to let my guard down. I stopped questioning the pace. I started picturing a future with him. We moved in together after 6 months. He proposed just 3 months after that. It was on a weekend trip to Asheville, candlelit dinner, string quartet, the whole fairy tale setup. I remember thinking, this is it. This is how the story is supposed to go. He said all the right words. I've never loved anyone like I love you. You're the one I was waiting for. You made me believe in love again. I cried, I said yes, and just like that we were engaged. I posted the ring on Instagram, my inbox flooded with congratulations. Even people I hadn't spoken to since high school said things like, "You guys are couple goals." But no one saw what I saw behind the scenes, like how he flinched the one time I called him babe in public, or how he would go quiet whenever we talked about kids, or how he still had a shoebox full of old letters in the back of his closet, addressed to Emily, but I pretended I never saw them. I convinced myself it was fine. Everyone has baggage. I just didn't realize I was the baggage handler. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being the woman he fell for. I became the woman trying to replace someone else's ghost. But I didn't want to see it. Not yet. Not when there were venues to tour and cake tastings to schedule and a Pinterest board full of florals and lace and happily ever afters. Not when everyone kept telling me how lucky I was. Not when I had already convinced myself this was what love was supposed to feel like: anxious, uncertain, like something you had to earn. It wasn't until we stood at that altar and he said her name that I finally stopped lying to myself. They say hindsight is 20/20, but when you're in love, or at least in something that looks like love, it's amazing how blind you can choose to be. It started with small things. After we got engaged, Nathan began getting more distracted. He started coming home later, said work was piling up, said he had deadlines. I believed him. He'd always been career-driven. That's part of what I liked about him. He had ambition, direction. But the man who used to text me at lunch just to say he missed me now sometimes went hours without replying at all. I remember one night I had made dinner, lit candles, even put on the little red dress he liked. He came in late, eyes tired, shirt wrinkled, and barely touched his plate. When I asked if everything was okay, he just said, "Yeah, just tired. Work's been brutal." Then he kissed my forehead like I was his kid sister and went to bed early. The next morning, I found a receipt in his coat pocket. Dinner for 2 at a restaurant we used to love. Only, I hadn't been there. When I asked, he shrugged it off, said it was a client, just business. I told myself not to overthink. Told myself trust was the foundation of marriage. That this was just pre-wedding stress. That I was the one being paranoid. But something had shifted. I could feel it. I started noticing the name Emily again, not just in passing in him. There was a moment one I'll never forget. We were going over our guest list, and I asked him if he wanted to invite anyone else from his side. He paused, then said, "I don't think she'd come, even if I did." I asked, "She who?" And he looked at me like he didn't realize he'd spoken aloud. He quickly brushed it off. "Never mind, just someone from work." But I knew he meant her. It was like she was this silent presence in our relationship. Never seen, never spoken of, but always there. A ghost he couldn't stop chasing. I started spiraling quietly. I checked his Instagram activity. I noticed he'd liked one of her posts, some blurry sunset with a cryptic caption, "Some places you never leave. Even if you walk away." That post was 2 days old. He hadn't liked my last 3. Still, I said nothing. I told myself not to be that girl, the jealous fiancé, the one who snoops, but it ate away at me. Until one night, I broke. He was asleep beside me. I opened his laptop. He always left it open. No password. I wasn't trying to dig. Not really. I just needed to know. I opened his photos folder. There, buried under trip albums and screenshots, was a folder named Do Not Open. Of course, I opened it. Inside were dozens of pictures. Not of us, of them. Nathan and Emily, laughing on the beach, holding hands at a vineyard, her asleep on his chest, a blurry shot of her brushing her teeth in his t-shirt. I don't know what hurt more, that he kept them, or that some of them were time-stamped after we started dating. I closed the laptop, crawled back into bed, and laid there in the dark, listening to him breathe, wondering if he was dreaming of me or her. The next morning, I said nothing. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself that marriage would fix it. That once we said I do, he'd leave her behind. That maybe this was just leftover grief, not emotional infidelity. But deep down, I knew better. Still, I pushed forward. We picked a venue, sent out invitations. I chose a dress. He barely looked at it. I asked him if he wanted to write his own vows. He hesitated, then said, "Can we just use the traditional ones?" I said sure, told myself he was just nervous. Then came the night before the wedding. We were staying at separate hotels. As tradition goes, I was in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My phone buzzed. It was his name on the screen. I picked up, expecting some sweet, reassuring words. Instead, I heard muffled breathing, then a voice soft, strained, like he didn't know the call had connected. "I still think about you," he said. "I wish things had ended differently." A pause. "Then I don't know if I'm doing the right thing." My chest went cold. "Hello," I said, barely a whisper. He gasped. "Wait, who is this?" "You called me, Nathan." Long silence. Then he hung up. I didn't sleep that night. But I still got up, did my makeup, put on my dress, and walked into that church. Because part of me still hoped, still believed he'd choose me, completely, finally. And then, he said her name. The moment he said her name, it felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. I didn't move, I didn't blink, I didn't even breathe. Everyone froze. The officiant looked up, confused. My maid of honor stiffened beside me. My mother gasped. Someone in the back dropped their phone. The sound echoed like a gunshot. And Nathan? He just stood there, still holding my hands, still looking me in the eyes, like he hadn't just detonated a bomb at our wedding. He didn't correct himself. He didn't stammer. He didn't apologize. He just paused, like maybe if he waited long enough, I'd pretend it didn't happen, that we'd both laugh and move on, that the altar we were standing at didn't just collapse into rubble under our feet. I looked at him. I really looked at him. And suddenly it all made sense. The late nights, the lies, the folder, the silence. The way I always felt like I was standing in someone else's shadow. I wasn't marrying a man. I was marrying a memory. A memory of a woman who still lived in his heart, in his head, and clearly on the tip of his tongue. Something inside me broke. But something else, something deeper, finally snapped awake. I pulled my hands away, and I walked. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my bouquet or slap him or demand answers. I just turned around, heels echoing on the church floor like a slow funeral march, and left. My father called after me. My mother sobbed into her hands. A bridesmaid ran after me, asking, "What do we do now?" I didn't answer. Outside, the air hit me like ice, cold, sharp, real. And then I ran. Down the steps, into the parking lot, past the limo waiting to take us to the reception that would never happen. I got into my own car, still in my dress, makeup untouched, veil still pinned to my head. I looked like a bride. But I felt like a ghost. I drove with no destination, just away, away from the church, away from the guests, away from him. I didn't cry until I hit the freeway. And when I did, it came out in gasps, raw, ugly, convulsing sobs that made me pull over onto the shoulder and scream into the steering wheel. I wasn't just mourning a wedding, I was mourning every part of myself I gave away trying to be enough. When I finally got to a motel, some rundown place off the highway, I checked in with shaky hands and no luggage. The receptionist didn't ask, just handed me a key and avoided my eyes. That night, I laid on the stiff mattress in a $4,000 dress, staring at a ceiling with water stains, and asked myself, how did I get here? And the truth, I knew. I had known for a long time. I knew he wasn't over her. I knew I was a placeholder. I knew love isn't supposed to feel like you're constantly auditioning. But I stayed, because I was scared. Scared no one else would love me, scared to be alone, scared to disappoint everyone who had already sent gifts and RSVPs and bought dresses. So I kept quiet, until he said her name, and finally, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. The next morning, I turned off my phone. I didn't want to read the texts, the missed calls, the damage control. I wasn't ready to talk to my mom or explain to my aunt why the chicken piccata and open bar wouldn't be happening. Instead, I went to the one place I hadn't been in years, my childhood home. It was empty. My parents had moved out long ago, but the key still worked. I walked through dusty rooms, peeling wallpaper, creaky floors, and I cried. Cried for the girl who used to believe in fairy tales. Cried for the woman who bent herself into knots to keep a man who never really saw her. Cried for the version of me who almost said I do to someone who didn't know my name, only hers. I stayed there for days. No makeup, no mirrors, just me and silence. And somewhere in that stillness, I started hearing my own voice again. It was faint, hoarse, but real. It said, "You're allowed to leave." It said, "You're not weak for walking away." It said, "This doesn't make you unlovable, it makes you brave." For the first time in what felt like years, I believed it. And just like that, the healing began. Not fast, not easy, but real. It didn't happen overnight. Healing never does. There were mornings I woke up and forgot, just for a second, that I'd left my own wedding, and then it would hit me all over again like a punch to the chest. There were days I blamed myself, nights I stared at the ceiling, replaying everything, every red flag, every gut feeling I swallowed, every moment I pretended I was okay. But over time, the silence stopped feeling like punishment. It started to feel like space. Space to breathe, to reflect, to rebuild. One morning, I walked into a coffee shop near my old apartment. I hadn't been there since before the engagement. The barista looked up, smiled, and said, "Haven't seen you in a while. You doing okay?" And I surprised myself by answering, "Yeah, I think I actually am." That was the turning point. Not some grand revelation, not a movie moment with swelling music and tears. Just a quiet realization I survived. And then something shifted. I started writing. At first, it was just for me, journals full of thoughts, poems, fragments of memory. But eventually, I posted one entry anonymously online. It was about walking away from a wedding. And it went viral. Hundreds, then thousands of comments from women, men, strangers, people who had stood at the edge of something wrong and didn't know how to leave, people who stayed and regretted it, people who left and never looked back. Suddenly, my pain had a purpose. I kept writing, I shared more. Eventually, I started a blog, The Bride Who Walked. It wasn't about revenge, or shame, or scandal. It was about reclaiming your voice after you've silenced it for too long. It was about reminding people, especially women, that no is still a full sentence. That almost getting married isn't a failure. That walking away, even at the last minute, can be the bravest damn thing you ever do. One story turned into many. Others began to share their own. A woman who left her fiancé after he cheated during their engagement trip. A man who called off a wedding after realizing he was marrying out of guilt, not love. A girl who said no just 2 hours before walking down the aisle, and still wonders if it was the right thing. All of us different lives, same ache, but we were healing, together. And me, I started to feel whole again. Not because I found someone new, not because I replaced Nathan, but because, for the first time, I stopped trying to be someone for someone else. I started being me. I went back to therapy. I adopted a second cat. I moved to a new apartment with no ghosts in the walls. I started teaching writing workshops, helping others tell their truths, even the messy, unflattering ones. And slowly, my life began to feel like mine again. I don't know where Nathan is now. I don't really care. I hope he found peace. I hope he stopped chasing shadows. But more than that, I hope he never stands at another altar unless he's absolutely sure who he's saying yes to. As for me, I never got to say I do, but I said something even more powerful. I said I won't. And in that choice, I found a kind of love I'd never experienced before. The love of finally choosing myself. If you've ever stood at the edge of something that felt almost right, but your gut whispered no. If you've ever walked away from a relationship, a friendship, a version of your life that others expected you to live, then the story was for you. And maybe in some way, it is your story too. Because walking away doesn't always mean giving up. Sometimes, it means waking up. Sometimes, it's the first real yes you've said to yourself in years. If this hit close to home, if it reminded you of a choice you made or still need to make. Tell me in the comments, or just leave a simple "I'm here" so I know you're out there. And if you think someone you know needs to hear this story today, don't hesitate, share it. You never know whose life it might change. This story is part of a series based on true confessions from Reddit retold with depth, raw emotion, and real voice. If you want more powerful stories like this one, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell, because the next story might be the one you need to hear most. Thanks for listening, and remember, it's never too late to choose yourself.